start recording. I think I'm doing that. And if people come in, that'll be great. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at the questions that I had, and um, in the questions that Caro sent out.
I,
So, for example, I had, so how might we integrate as part of K-12 STEM teacher education, or integrate embodiment in, as part of K-12 STEM teacher education, both in content and methods courses?
mhm.
So do you have
Yeah,
thoughts about that?
I do. We don't do methods courses because just the first 2 years, but I
Mm,
have trouble separating content and methods anyway. So,
I agree.
um, yeah, I mean, well, just today, because this article is on my mind, I was with my Math 122. That's the second content course, and we're talking about proof and definition and geometry. And so I think it's very easy, and like it's. I think embodied mathematics is not a difficult thing if you have your mind on it to incorporate it into classroom practice. And I kind of like the idea at the end of the argument of at the end of the article about I forget what the terminology was. This micro macro sort of
Oh,
utterances that we
affirmation.
can make
Yeah, affirmations,
during
micro and
affirmations. That's what it was. Yeah. Like that to me is very much how I teach the course anyway. It's very much me sharing my modeling and sharing the thoughts I would have about future teaching. And so this is just another thing to share, and just making sure the activities are hitting on more than just the verbal and written word modalities and really looking at the whole body as a way to do these things. We were
Mhm.
a little bit stumped today because we were talking about just, kind of how would you gesture the idea of divisibility?
Ooh.
And so we had that conversation, and I was surprised. A student, she kind of did this sort of motion, which I thought,
Mhm.
oh, that's really neat. And others were kind of thumbs upping and nodding. So we're trying to create this embodied space in this virtual space for people who don't have their cameras on. And the
Mhm.
idea, and like, what does a communal gesture even look like? And you can't see the other people that are gesturing, um, but it's still happening. And so I think like those types of things are really interesting to point out to students in those classes when, and it's difficult because the cognitive load of it all is that they're still trying to understand the mathematics
Right.
and they have some anxiety about the mathematics, but these types of things, stepping out of the comfort zone of it has to be written, it has to be this, I think it helped them to feel more confident. But
That's
it,
great.
it takes some flexibility, I think, to be able to openness to it. And without reading this literature, I wouldn't have necessarily thought about it. I'm sure I still would have done it in some sense, but I don't think it'd be much as much in the forefront without being engaged with the theory of it.
Right. And the words I like to use are intentional about it. So, really purposeful and on purpose with a purpose is what I think about. And I like the question that you posed for your students because there's so many ways to think about it. And like this, the cutting, but I'm also thinking about, okay, and what's left in each of those little subdivisions.
Yep.
And I can imagine people doing like, oh, this, or something like that, where they're thinking about grouping really.
Yeah, and then we did the
Oh,
same thing with the triangle as well because we were talking geometry and number theory, and that one was more obvious. That was I got many more definitive, like much more of like the. See, I'm like out of my lingo here for the, but I guess representative or I'm trying to think like what to, yeah, right. So like the very literal gesturing for these
mhm.
things, not as abstract.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so air tracing.
Yeah, in that case.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, and I liked your comment too about content and methods. Like it's difficult to separate those, especially because historically I have taught at institutions that almost all of the math majors are going to be teachers. And so I'm always thinking about how do we connect this to their future role as a teacher. And so really just bringing it up in any math course where we're learning mathematics.
I think it's just very powerful, and I tell my colleagues about it all the time. So I was teaching trig for the first time in a long time last semester, and I busted out the yarn,
Uh-huh.
and we were making circles and triangles in full size.
Uh-huh.
And later in this, I found out we had an embedded tutor in the class, and one student was a regular for her, and she had said
Uh-huh.
that those things that stuck out to her most were those times where we were standing up, actually acting out these shapes, which was like a
Absolutely.
very great validation of like that this
Yeah.
can happen in any course. It doesn't have to be just for a certain type of student in a certain course. It really should be happening all throughout the entire
Yep.
math curriculum.
Yeah, I've done that. Like you said, bust out the yarn with talking about ellipses,
Mm,
constructing using the formal definition of an ellipse to create a big ellipse together, or even a hyperbola or a parabola. But I generally start with an ellipse, and then when we talk about taxi cab geometry, like, okay, what happens now based on this formal definition? But it's amazing how, as they think about the definition, they begin to tweak together this object that they're creating. And they're like, well, we need more and more points, and oh, you got to let go a little bit of your string so I can have a little bit more of my string, and so forth. So
yeah.
I like that. That's great.
Yeah, it's that's why it's been challenging in the remote environment. Although it was interesting reading the article about the different systems that are, you can manipulate things virtually.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been trying that with like Google Jamboards and Google Slides and things like that, where they're actually manipulating objects on a screen together, which is fun. But
Good.
it's like reinventing the wheel. Like all these things, I think, what did I do? Oh yeah, I used post-it notes, or I used yarn, or I used toothpicks, or I used whatever. Now I'm like, how do I do that online? I had to rebuild everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Rebuild and
yeah,
rethink. Have to rethink it.
yeah. I would use toothpicks for triangle inequality, just
Yeah.
for the just to define what a triangle is. And now I'm thinking, well, what can I do? Because with slides, when you move an object, it's going to resize on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to you can't
Right.
fix it. And
Right.
so I made the three. I didn't get to it today, but if they use the rotate function, then they could technically
Uh,
move the things
yeah.
sort of, but it's going to be a mess. And there are other things I could use like GeoGebra or something like that to play around with, but it's still it's an interesting design challenge. But
Yeah.
to see all these things that are out there, because I was not aware of some of the other things mentioned in the article, so I was surprised, like graspable math, I'd not heard of that, so that was really
Yep.
interesting to read about that.
Oh, well, let's see. Can we move on to our next question?
Yeah,
I want to make sure we have. I want to look at the schedule real quick. Oh, they're gonna send us something, right? Yeah,
I
they're
think
gonna
so, like after
flash the
2025.
back. That's right. How might we inform collegiate faculty about the role of embodiment in teaching and learning collegiate STEM content? Ideas about that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that's the puzzle, right? So collegiate math faculty, you can't unless you've got some sort of. Okay, so my department's somewhat unique in that I'm sort of in charge of all professional development. So my first thought is have professional development around this. But unless you make it mandatory,
Mm-hmm.
you won't get the word out to everybody. I really think it has to come from like testimonials from faculty that have done this,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the theory to back it. Again, kind of similar to what the article said, where you have if you can have the theoretical basis and the practical applications and a way to guide people through it as well and have some sort of deliverable at the end, then it might actually stick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm the type of person where I read something and I might say, I'm going to try it because that's sort of my personality. I'll uproot tomorrow's lesson if I read something interesting today. That's just how I
Right.
work. But I know my colleagues are not the same. Um, they're, I think, more inflexible. And so it takes a little bit of work to get people to see that. And then also just the entire paradigm shift of the fact that students don't have to be doing traditional things within the classroom, that it's
Mm-hmm.
okay for a calculus student to stand up and walk along
Right.
whatever they need, whatever they're doing, like, to
Right.
draw like to be the tangent line or something, like
Right.
if I wanted them to be the
Right.
tangent line on some life-sized
Yeah.
parabola.
Yeah.
um, like that's not an inappropriate thing to do. It doesn't have to be in the K-8, K-12
Mm-hmm.
place. And I think it's tricky sometimes coming from me because I'm the math for teachers guy, and
Yeah.
they'll think, oh, well, that'll work fine for the teachers, but it's not going to
Yeah.
work fine for the math majors. It's like, well, no, it will work well. I mean, there was a whole that doctoral thesis that was done essentially completely with dance, wasn't it? Like it
Oh
completely.
yeah, Ronnie, and she's here. Yeah, Roni is her name. Yeah,
Yeah.
and she's actually here at this workshop
Was
today.
she? I didn't even notice. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I just
But
got a message from her.
I think it takes a bit of work though to kind of break down those walls. And
Mhm.
also has to be how we're assessing our students,
Right,
right? That's a whole other thing. If
right.
somebody just relies upon two exams as the only means of assessment,
Hmm.
which for them is this summative thing anyway. I mean, how do you break down those barriers to get them to see, well, you're assessing students all the time,
Right.
and students' performance on a test is only measuring one type of way that they're able to
Hmm.
demonstrate their knowledge. So there's a lot of walls to break down, I think, to get to the collegiate faculty.
You said something interesting about that's only for the secondary teachers, but even the role of manipulatives, where we think, oh, the manipulatives are for elementary students, the high school students aren't going to like it. It turns out they like them just fine. And I think the same is true at the collegiate level. And I was thinking about the tangent line on a parabola, and I just thought, wow, we could actually take our rope and lay it out on our giant Cartesian coordinate system and pick different points, and each person could lie at that point how they would have to lie in order to be tangent, or even the
Mhm.
same person. Okay, how would you be laying if you were tangent at this point? Where would you be laying if you're tangent at this point? And so that they could see how that the slopes would have to change in terms of where they're of the point at which we're looking for the tangent. So that, I think that would be a great activity.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I like what you said about manipulatives, because I tell this to the future teachers all the time.
Hmm.
Um, Even for K through 12 students, the fact that they're questioning the curiosity, the playfulness of mathematics starts to go away over
Hmm.
the years just seems wrong. I mean, not
Right.
always, but generally speaking, it seems like if anything, it should become more playful as the topics get more complex.
That, yes, I'm a big believer of that, because I think in mathematics we have this philosophy that we have to portray everything abstractly first because math is abstract. Instead of, hey, the way that we learn anything new is by playing with it first and then leading to the abstract piece. Yeah.
So I think sometimes the way to get to collegiate faculty is to give them that play space, maybe,
Right.
and the tools that we might give our students and make them see, hey, this is fun, but I'm actually seeing the mathematical connection. I'm making those connections.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
that would get some buy-in. That
Yeah.
coupled with the other things I said before about,
Yeah.
actually
And in
the
fact,
theory.
so the second workshop that we were hoping to have, which Dor commented about, that it was supposed to be here this summer, but I do hope that we can have it next summer. And that's exactly what it's going to be. It's professional development for collegiate teachers on embodied cognition.
Hmm.
So let's see. Oh, the third one. So in this article, we claim that embodiment can assist with equity issues, especially with students whose first language is not English. How else might embodiment support equitable teaching practices in K through 16 STEM courses, especially during the time of COVID?
Hmm. That's a tough. I mean, that's tricky. I just told my students today that gesture, for instance, transcends language, right? So
Right.
so if a student doesn't know the mathematical terminology for whatever reason, whether it's an actual like literal English to non-English language speaker, or if it's because of just preparation and not being exposed to that terminology, then having that bridge for them to communicate with their peers, I think, is leading to more equitable practice, uh,
Mhm.
and putting students more in it, all in kind of that prepared situation. If you ask it, this came up with my two sons the other day. I asked them to define what a triangle is. I have a second and fourth grade son. Um, they don't have the words to define what a triangle is,
Right.
but they've got many other methods that they can do it visually or gesturally,
Mhm.
uh, or with some sort of object, right? And so it's like that to me is an equitable practice. I think just collaborative tasks themselves, where it is more multimodal, um, they become maybe more low floor, high ceiling types of tasks,
Mhm.
because students can play they kind of could fit into those roles that they feel comfortable with and still be a contributor to the task, because it's maybe less abstract, maybe more tangible.
Mhm.
But yeah, but during COVID, I try to think, so that's the puzzle, right? How do we make this actually happen, this embodied mathematics happen virtually, when some students are on phones and some students are on computers,
Mhm.
and that some computers have the ability to annotate and manipulate on the screen, others don't. And so, what do you do to make sure that access is equal across that medium? And I've yet to solve the puzzle, but I think we have to be very intentional with the design to make sure that we make the activity engaging and accessible, and acknowledge the fact that different devices will have different ways of engaging in the tasks. So we can't just say every group has to produce this thing in this medium, because it's not going to happen necessarily. But maybe making sure the groups have somebody that can share their screen, for instance, that'd be like a start, or making sure that, you know, people have the ability to manipulate a certain object. But it's a puzzle still, definitely.
It is, and even the point that Carl brought up, that depending if you have the updated Zoom or not, you're going to be able to do this. Even that's an equity question. And you know, some people just haven't uploaded it or can't because of whatever system they're using, that they might not be able to upload it. So yeah, there's lots to think about, and even just having safe conversations with our students about why we want them to have their video camera on. So it's, and I even thinking about this activity that we were talking about with the parabola, I thought, I wonder if I couldn't do a PD like that, where the in advance use painter's tape and create a grid that's whatever size I would imagine, and then use string or whatever to tape down a parabola that is of this shape. This, our favorite parabola, x squared, of course, we would use that poster child. But then during the PD, it would be to, okay, go lay yourself down and see where you are, and just reflect on that. And I wonder how we could turn that into a lesson. Would our students even do it, is of course the first question. But if we said this is a grid we're going to use throughout the semester, so have it somewhere where you can use it throughout the semester. Let's
that'd be interesting.
Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, so now we're dealing with, so you're talking about like trying to do that type of activity remotely, where students will they'll adjust their own space to be able to have that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. So the idea, the equity part of it is tricky because, you know, so I'll have students who are driving in a car while they're in class, right? So they would lose out on that potential activity. Or even for me, I'm in my little like nook in my kitchen. I would have to, I think I'd have the space to do it, but yeah, and it's a big question of our students, should they be allowed to have this privacy of their physical space that's around them? Do we care about that? Is that more important than engaging in this activity? And so you'd have to think about a choice. Well, if you don't have the physical space, then maybe you can create a slide on Google, you know, and a person in there, and that person is going to be your slope that keeps moving around this shape. I don't know.
I like that.
Something
and I just thought of another way, because I like how you took it to the virtual world, and I just thought of another way to take it to the physical world. It could just be on your paper, sketch the parabola x squared. Use your finger or your pencil even, and see where that pencil would have to lie in order to be tangent. So it's still some physical aspect to it, and that they could still easily engage with it.
Yeah, I think that's good. Then there's choices. You could do the full scale model, the virtual model, the paper model. Yep. You're doing something at least that is embodied.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And there's different experiences with the different modalities. It's for sure a different experience.
Yeah, I'd be curious how to track such a thing. You know, which experience leads to the most lasting impression for students, or is it dependent upon the student and what makes, maybe if a student is not comfortable lying down on their floor, they'd rather just manipulate another object.
Right.
It's hard to say.
And I don't know that it's which one is like more lasting. It's I wonder what it is that they take away from that experience. So what are the takeaways from the different experiences? Like, you know, what do I get out of like laying my pencil, you know, and like I'm thinking about having the parabola x squared. Like what do I, and I'm literally thinking about it's moving up like this in front of me. So like, what do I get like from recognizing that, oh, at the different points, my pen is here, then it's here, then it's here, and then it's here, and then I'm moving it up, and then it's there, and then it's there, and then it's there. And so what experience do I get from that as compared to doing it with my finger, possibly on a piece of paper?
Hmm.
And what experience do I get from laying my whole body down on a tarp?
Hmm.
So I think those are the questions, is what is the experience, not, and not so much, which one is more memorable or more lasting in terms of memory, but what do they get out of that?
Yeah,
Like,
that
for
makes sense.
example, do they get the same sort of language? Because in some points it would be, what I notice, what happens when I do full body activities is that they actually identify with the object. So for example, when I have them do the transformations on the grid, which is the picture that Doris showed, they talk about, I really did not like being a point in the third quadrant or
Hmm.
the fourth quadrant. Or no, I'm sorry, they didn't like being a point in the first or second quadrant.
Hmm.
And they would use language like that. It was so much easier to be a point in the fourth or third quadrant. And so they actually identify with that mathematical object, where I think when we're doing things like with the pencil, it's like, well, I had to put the pencil
Hmm.
in such a place.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of different identification, I think.
Hmm. That's very interesting. It makes sense. Yeah, I experienced something similar with the trig students, because I use different colors yarn, and so I'm the red side of the triangle, or I'm the green. It's funny how they do they do redefine themselves very quickly as these things,
Yeah.
even though it just feels like you're assigning them these roles, and they take them pretty quickly. At least I noticed quickly in that one.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So let's see. The next thing we have, well, here are questions that people asked me. Um, are there other ways in which research can be shared with K through 12, 16 teachers other than PD? And in methods courses, it seems that there are plenty of research articles written with which explain the benefits of embodiment. However, these articles are not typically read by teachers or interpretable in an actionable way. So I'm thinking about that these papers are not written for practitioners.
Hmm.
Could a series of blog posts directed towards teachers be created and widely shared in a way that would be directly actionable to teachers? I like that. That might actually be some outcome that we could do from the second workshop.
Hmm.
I'm going to just respond to that. This is an excellent question. Our suggestion. I bet we could have this as an outcome on the second workshop. Do you have other thoughts about that question?
I agree. I mean, I think one of the more intimidating things about education literature and research for math faculty is that they feel like they're behind as soon as they start reading it, because there is this jargon and terminology that those of us in education research know or been exposed to, but they haven't. And so there's a process of there's almost like an orientation they need to really be able to understand, and also to realize that terminology is important, but you also need to be able to read. I think, let me think of the best word for it, like read strategically through these
Yes. Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
That's what I've found. You don't need to be an expert on every piece of the things you're reading, but you have to be able to link it to what you care about and care to take from it. And then if there's things you're curious about, you dig deeper and find them. And but yeah, articles can be intimidating in that respect, for people that are not. I'm a grad student. I've been a perpetual grad student, so I've read many. I've never written a journal article, but I've read hundreds, thousands of them at this point. So I know the game, even just having an orientation to the structure of what the article is going to be. they almost all have the same formula.
Nicole, thanks for joining me. You might be my only person. I only had one
Oh,
person at my last breakout room.
yeah, I saw that. And then I felt really bad. It's like, I want to talk to you too, but I wanted to hear a bit about the play and talk about the play too.
Oh my gosh, no, you should go and hear whatever you want because I mean, you and I can talk any time of the day. So it's I don't know if we're gonna, I bet we don't get any more. Oh, it says I'm already recording. Huh. I wonder if it just continues on from the last one.
It might.
So, well, I bet no one else is gonna come here. Oh, let me message these. Hold on. Remember, I'm supposed to have another committee meeting right now. I have a conflict today. So, well, let's just go ahead and get started, Nicole. Thanks for joining me. What does this tell me? I'm guessing people don't really care about teacher education. That this isn't their line of inquiry.
We've got one more person who might be coming, it looks like.
Oh, how do you see that? Oh,
If you
John.
click on breakout rooms, you can just see who's coming.
Oh, I see. Hi, John. You're muted.
Sorry. Hello. How are you?
Good. How about you?
Good. Just fine. Thanks.
Let's see. We'll see if there's Nicole. Do you see any more people coming?
I'm
Oh,
not seeing any more people coming, but if she's having to manually put them, it just takes a couple extra minutes.
right. Okay. So we'll give her a few minutes to do this. John, tell us where you're from.
I am from University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm working with Mitch Nathan.
Oh,
And so I had been involved in the Hidden Village game sort of before we got the video game started. So I was part of the project when we invited undergraduates and graduate students into a lab, and they were presented with a textual conjecture that they would then verbally prove, and we coded their gesture use in the proof. And then the game has sort of moved on from that phase. But that's what I have been doing. And now I'm doing, I'm working with Mitch, but my project is on concreteness fading and geometry. So just trying to transition students' experiences from concrete manipulatives to, at the moment, what I'm like Euclidean drawings or icons, and then the symbolic formulas. Sorry, not to take up too much time, but I am finding myself very much interested in working in the future with future teacher educators. So more of like a curriculum and instruction or teacher education type of a program, even though I'm in learning sciences. And this notion of helping teachers recognize gesture or student thinking through their gesture expression seems fascinating. And that's sort of what drew me to this group, but also, of course, what how you are implementing embodiment in teacher education.
thank you. Thanks for joining us. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself? I know
Sure.
you, so John knows you, unless you guys have another session already. Nope. Okay. Go ahead, Nicole.
So I'm Nicole Infante. I am math faculty at West Virginia University. I am very much interested in how we use gesture in particular in higher level mathematics. One of the things from the article that really spoke to me is sort of the tension that teachers face in their training versus what their like mentor teachers do. in the real classroom. This is something I've seen over and over again. And I'm always looking for better ways to address that, I guess.
Oh, great. Thanks, Nicole. We have another visitor. Let's see. Hannah, would you introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, I'm Hannah Smith. I'm a third-year graduate student at WPI. So I work with Erin, but I also work with Yvonne Arroyo on a math game system, and we do some teacher professional development with that. And I came here, my question was the first general question I put in, and I saw someone kind of answered it.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So I wanted to maybe chat a little bit about that, but I'm a little late, so I don't know if you've already started something.
No, we just introduced ourselves right now. And so John is a grad student also. You're wrapping up, right? Almost done? Or I don't know why I hypothesized almost done. I added that.
Well, I am beginning my 6th year and I'm a little behind, so I'm planning to submit my master's in a week, Monday a week. And then who knows, but maybe 3 more years after that, but one can never quite tell.
Great.
And John, where do you go? Sorry.
I'm at University of Wisconsin in Madison working with Mitch Nathan.
Cool. Awesome.
Nicole, do you want to reintroduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Nicole Infante, West Virginia University. I'm in the math department.
All right, so let's go ahead and look at the questions. And Hannah, I'll start with your question because we discussed it a little bit with my last participant. And I don't know if the rest of you have access to the questions, but this was Hannah's question. She asked, are there ways in which research can be shared with K through 16 teachers other than PD and in methods courses? It seems that there are plenty of research articles written which explain the benefits of embodiment. However, these articles are not typically read by teachers or interpretable in an actionable way. Could a series of blog posts directed towards teachers be created and widely shared in a way that could be directly actionable to teachers? And I think that's an excellent question and an excellent suggestion also in terms of having a blog. And so one of the things that I do have funding for is a second workshop that was supposed to be a follow-up to the Wisconsin workshop. We're going to have it somehow, whether it's virtual or not this summer, but we will have it. I'm hoping we can have at least some folks face-to-face and maybe something virtual. I don't know exactly how it's going to be, but that workshop is specifically designed for PD for undergraduate math faculty. And so that's our target audience, including graduate students. And I think that we could certainly, as an outcome of that workshop, have a blog. And then the other suggestion that I think is maybe even more important is to actually publish some of these activities, some of the things that we do in a practitioner journal, because we don't see enough of that in the practitioner journals. And those are the journals that teachers read. They are members of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And so I think publishing in their journal, Mathematics Teaching and Learning, I'm actually working on a manuscript right now that I hope to submit to them. But I think that that's one of our first steps, is to disseminate via practitioner journals. Does that make sense, Hannah?
Yeah, and I even wonder, so my background is also as a preschool teacher, which is very different than K through 12 education. And I'm wondering how accessible even practitioner journals are. And I don't know anything about this. I did go to the regional NCTM conference last year, and there was a bunch of teachers, but I still don't think it's accessible to everyone.
Right.
And I think it's so important, all the embodiment work that's done. And I just really want all of the teachers to be able to use it. But some of them, I worry, wouldn't take the time to read, say, a 20-page article. They just want like a quick set of information that they can immediately use in their classroom.
Right. So the NCTM, there used to be 3 journals for NCTM. The arithmetic teacher, which was for, K6 maybe, and then middle school teachers, and then secondary teachers, which also kind of overlapped with collegiate teaching because there was some overlap there. And just because of funding and membership, they condensed all of their journals to one journal, the Mathematics Teaching and Learning. And they're not 20-page articles whatsoever. These are like 5 to 6 pages. And some of them you can have links to, you know, further activities and that sort of thing, but they really are designed to be for the practitioner. And I think another avenue is within the state teacher association. So the affiliates, state affiliates with the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So for example, I have published some very simple 2 or 3 pages that really is just the description of an activity. And it's basically about telling students how to turn a paper. So if they turn the paper, so it's about looking at the same task from a different perception by simply turning the page 90 degrees, 45 degrees, whatever. And that was a 2 to 3 page thing. And so that was in our Colorado Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And I got lots of feedback from that from the teachers because those are things that they read because they're very, very short. And so I think that just, and you know, and maybe here's something I would add to it. These are not what we would identify as top research journals because they're not research journals. But I think if we talk about the impact that they have on our community, then that's something different that we in the research community need to stop and think about. It's like, you know, most researchers don't really impact directly the students because they mostly are focusing on research, not on teaching. And so the impact that our work can have on teachers, I think we as researchers need to stop and think about the value of that and the role that that plays in promotion and tenure and so forth also. Yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
So something I've been thinking about that I haven't been able to make happen, but I think one other way that we might reach a bigger audience and get them to try more things is to have short videos actually demonstrating the implementation. I think reading it is one thing, but really seeing it in action and seeing the types of questionings, how the students really engage, gives a much bigger picture of what's going on. And so if you can have like a video library of here's the 10-minute version of the lesson for you to watch and see how it goes. I don't know how exactly to go about creating that exactly. And then here's the resources that go with it. That makes it's searchable, it's easy to find. Because I think the PD, sometimes even just the writing, it can be just overwhelming to really see how this is supposed to translate into a true practice. And the research also tells us that without more extensive support, a lot of teachers will try things once, but not go back to it because they didn't feel it went well.
Right.
And so having something to compare to go back to and say, yeah, I was really close here. I need to just do it again and it'll get better. Right. I think could be really powerful.
And that's one of the things that we were anticipating would happen with the second workshop is that we would be videotaping these and that a deliverable from the workshop, from participating in the workshop, is that each participant would create at least one embodied activity, either individually or as a team, that they would go back and use in their classroom and then reflect on it. So like I was anticipating that there would be some research component to that workshop also, and I still hope that that can happen. But that really there is something that the participants take away, will use, and report back on it. And also that they would have access to everyone else's deliverable. So those are things that we're thinking about, Hannah. It just, you know, it's hard to do everything and COVID seems to make it harder. So John, it seems like you had a thought.
Oh, no, I was just kind of appreciating the challenge of that, I guess. The disconnect between, I guess, text-heavy research articles and then being in a classroom with live, you know, numerous live students and a whole lot of other concerns. I guess maybe if I could ask for some of your insight on the way you think about helping future teachers use gesture, either as a, like on an instructional side or as a recognition side, an assessment or recognition side of what students are thinking. Like, how do you see gesture in the classroom for future teachers, educating future teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something I love to talk about. And I'll tell you that it's something that I do in all my classes, whether it's filled with math majors or future math teachers. And those tend to be my clientele that I have as students. But I let them know this is the work that I do. I let them know about my gesture research and that it's in complex analysis. That's the focus actually that I have focused on. And so I let them know the work that I do. And I said, so you're going to notice a lot of times that I will say, oh, it looks like you have a question, like I just did with you, John. I do that all the time. And I say, and you'll notice that I will a lot of times say, put your pencils down and look at me. Because I want you to listen and to pay attention to what my hands are saying also. And I've come to a point where I have particular gesture moves that I implement when I'm conveying something. So they're very intentional at that time. And I let them know that. And sometimes they'll point out, oh, do you know that you just gestured blah, blah, blah? Did you do it because blah, blah, blah? So they become attuned to it and they become attuned to one another's gestures. And there's, I'm sure you've heard of revoicing. So a lot of times I'll say, hey, Sally, could you revoice what Billy just said in your own words? And what would you add to it? And then I also would say things like, hey, Sally, could you re-gesture what Billy just gestured? And what did those gestures mean to you? And how would you gesture what Billy said? And so, and we talk about it. What are the benefits of paying attention to gesture? How does that help you as a student that I pay attention to not just your gestures, but the verbiage and your facial expressions and body movements. So they know I'm paying attention to all of those things as they're expressing something to me. And we have big body movement activities that we do in class. In the previous session, we were just talking about the slope of the tangent line and how we might, I mean, there's so many virtual activities that, oh, that's, you know, you drag the line and so forth. And I said, but, you know, we could do lots of things where, okay, use your pen on a piece of paper and follow the trajectory at different points. And I said, but what if they had their piece of paper on their table and we used our finger to see where the tangent line would go and what the trajectory of that is? And what happens if I lay out a big parabola on the floor and I say, okay, use your body as a tangent line at these various points, and how is your body moving along that? And then discussing what are the different experiences that our students have with those different engagements of embodiment, because they are all different. And of course, those things take a little bit more time, but I think that they're very worthwhile.
So in addition to performing the action with them and explaining the theory, or you're also modeling it, I assume.
Yes, I
Yeah.
model it all the time. And so they're ready to go with, hey, can I use that giant tarp for my lesson that I have to teach? And they always come into my office. What activity could I create for this? And sometimes I'm not even ready with an answer, but I start brainstorming, like this parabola one. I'd never thought of it till in this previous session. And then Chris, who was in my previous session, was talking about right triangle trig and how he gets his yarn out. And all of a sudden I envisioned a giant hula hoop serving as the unit circle, using painter's tape for the X and Y axis, and using string for the various different special triangles. So things start coming into my head as I have these conversations. And then I also, well, oh, and I think the reason it came into my head is because, for example, in talking about the conics, for example, in geometry, before we talk about taxi cab geometry, we kind of go back to, oh, we already know this. What does it mean? So for example, if we're going to figure out what an ellipse in taxi cab geometry looks like, we would first explore that definition on the giant TARP, the giant Cartesian coordinate system, and lay out and create an ellipse with a given piece of string that we know we cut up into two different pieces to determine where the different points are going to be. And so I have pictures of our students doing all of that, and they realize, oh, you got to let go a little bit. And here's an interesting thing that happened with that activity. When they get to the major axis, where like one guy's like, I don't have any more string. How come you have it all? But that's the major axis is actually the length of, you know, where the two different points are going to meet. And so that's something that they discover. And so it's taking time to model this in the classroom and them thinking about it when they go and do their own lessons. And I get emails from students quite frequently of, I'm getting ready to teach blah, 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 any ideas? So I hope that helped. Any comments or thoughts about that? Nicole, looks like you have a thought.
It's just been interesting because, yeah, especially when you were talking about tangent lines. Yeah, I use pen a lot. I use hand a lot. I don't ever use the fingers a little bit harder.
It is, but isn't
but
it
using your whole hand?
discover them that I'd use my finger and then the students will say, oh, it's just easier if you use your hand, and they start going along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting you brought up the trig. I have something I do with my trig students where they all get a different sized unit circle, and then they use string to measure, and they cut different lengths to measure. Well, they start with measuring your radian to figure out your input and how that all translates to create the sine wave. And
yeah, so basically the way that I would like my teachers, my future teachers, to go and implement activities related to embodied activity, or embodied activities is what I call them, is we do them. And I model the facilitation of that. And we don't just do it once, we do it routinely. And my students know to get up and use their whole body to convey something to another student. They will move furniture around. This is just standard. It's a standard practice in my classroom. And I'm hoping that then it will become a standard practice for them.
there's
Hannah. Oh, sorry.
Someone else have a question?
No, go ahead. And then I'll let
Okay.
you know.
So I'm always wondering, is there ever an instance where it's more beneficial to keep it smaller than go bigger? I ran a study in a preschool classroom playing the numerical linear board game by Siegler, and then I like supersized it and had them walk along the spaces.
Mhm.
And I don't have enough participants yet, but it is showing to be less beneficial than playing it on a tabletop. So I'm wondering if you've ever experienced that going bigger is not better.
I think going bigger is not better when not everybody gets to experience it. So I think the tabletop allows everyone to experience it, where if we're doing the modeling, even like the parabola activity that I just described. So I think that's where it's nice to have multiple modalities. Like, for example, I just did the sum of the triangles of a right triangle, or of a triangle is 180 degrees. And this is in my history of math class, and we're talking about historical ways that that this is arrived at. And then I always like to sneak in embodied activities of other ways in which they could integrate it with the historical pieces. And so we, of course, did the formal proof, which was a no-brainer. And then they each made their own triangle and measured the angles and came up with 180. So everybody's engaged in that. And then everybody has a new triangle. They color the vertices, the angles, tear them out, lay them out, and get 180 degrees. So everybody gets to do that. And then I have a painter's tape triangle made out on the floor all ready to go. And I asked for a volunteer to come up and traverse all the angles. And so what happens is when you traverse the angles, you actually end up facing the opposite direction from where you started. And there's always errors in that they end up traversing the exterior angles instead of the interior angles. But because everyone's watching, they're like, wait a minute, why is she facing in the same direction? That would mean there's 360 degrees. So then they have to go back and somebody else tries it. But having everybody engage in the conversations and having the questions, I think, is what's important. And so starting micro and then building up to macro, I think, is good. Realizing that not everybody gets to experience the macro, but if we have multiple macro activities throughout the semester, then we can try to get everybody at least to engage in one macro activity. Nicole?
I wonder if some of that is also just the size of your people
Yes.
and how much their world and how much they can see and take in affects that.
Mm-hmm.
And while I think all the modeling and everything is really good, we also have to be aware that when they go and do their student teaching, sometimes they get paired with a teacher who's like, this is the worksheet, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to make sure that you're prepared to have a conversation with them. You may be told to just do this. Don't give up on these other ideas. You've seen how powerful they can be. When it's your decision, you need to make that choice for yourself. But I unfortunately have seen that too often. The mentor teacher is just like, this is the worksheet, you do it. There's no discussion of what they get to do.
Yeah,
So you have to be a cheerleader.
Having conversations with the teachers is so important. Like I always tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. And I hope that you'll be able to do it. You might not be able to do it when you student teach, but when you have your own classroom and you have control, I encourage you to do that. But certainly exposing them to these activities, I think, is really important. Otherwise, they'll never even know that it's an option for them. John, do you have other thoughts?
I have a slightly different question that I've been struggling with, which is I am trying to devise embodied activities to teach more like more formalized Euclidean proof. And I just have a disconnect. In other words, and I'm not native to math. I was a history major in school and I'm doing math now, geometry, but what I feel the intention is with Euclidean geometry is to be able to prove that, certain lines or segments are a certain size. Now you don't have to measure them. Euclid doesn't, but there is a validity in the construction, one after another. And the gesture, if I were to have students gesture a series of things, I haven't been able to convince myself that they would understand the legitimacy as they can see when they do a Euclidean series of constructions. And I know that's a loaded sort of bias on the symbol side. I'm stuck with it. Maybe it's the wrong goal. Like maybe Euclidean geometry is not the goal, but if it were the goal, I haven't been able to figure out how to incorporate gestures to teach that yet.